When Trump was first elected, initially there was some optimism as the stock market did well over the following months because basically people thought that there would be an increase in domestic manufacturing and a decrease in a lot of government regulations that make just things in general like housing, groceries, and so on more expensive. Less regulation means that goods are cheaper to either produce or import, and this means that people have more money in their pockets to spend money, which would make the stock market go up. But then the trade war started and tariffs started going crazy and people became very worried, and that leads us to where we are today, where Fox News has put out their Trump's first 100 days in office poll, and then people have responded telling what they think about how President Trump is doing, and based on the data that Fox News got, it's not looking so great for Trump. Fox News poll: the first 100 days of President Trump's second term, 82% are extremely or very concerned about inflation, down from 89% in January. And even though 82% is lower, that's good to see, it's still extremely high. That is a lot of people that are worried about inflation. As President Donald Trump approaches the 100th day of his second term, a Fox News survey finds voters pleased with the job that he's doing on border security, but displeased with most other issues, including, and very significantly, inflation. And this makes sense. Trump has, for the most part, stuck to his word with what he planned to do at the border, and border crossings and border encounters with border security and border patrol from illegal immigrants trying to get into the country are down pretty significantly from when Biden was in office. However, he is not so much stuck with what people thought he would do on things like the inflation and economy. People were expecting when Trump was elected, because he was a Republican and Republicans tend to lead more small government, more free market, that there would be more of a free market and they would be getting rid of regulations and taxes would come down. But then that didn't happen, and taxes actually started to increase because taxes are now coming in the form of tariffs and other tariff-related policies. And we can actually see people's sentiment on this when we look at consumer sentiment data. This is from the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Report that they put out every month. And you can see that consumer sentiment coming off of higher inflation was starting to actually improve. Inflation was going down, the economy was generally improving, and then when Trump was elected, right after that, it hit an all-time high. He was declared that he was going to be the winner in November. In December, we started to see it go up. And then he started talking about all the tariffs and the things he planned to do with those tariffs. And then consumer sentiment started to go down because maybe he wasn't going to pull back on taxes or regulation, but actually increase taxes and regulation via tariffs. And then it dropped significantly in February as these tariffs started to roll out. And then as they were delayed, there was some back and forth there, but they continued to be rolled out overall. And so they pulled back even more, and then consumer sentiment pulled back even more, and down from the high in December 2024 of however far this back graph goes, down 22 points to where it sits now at 52.2 points. This is not very good. Consumers are not very confident, but this isn't the only poll that has read this consumer confidence dropping. As you can see here, this is Consumer Confidence Index. I'm not actually sure who put this one together, as reported by Statista, and you can see it basically tells a very similar story. Consumer confidence was going up and up and up, and then when he was elected, it went up until people started to get squeamish because it looked like maybe Trump was actually going to create more problems than he was solving in terms of inflation and taxes with these tariffs. And so consumer confidence started to go back down. But then we have another consumer confidence measurement here. We can see it's starting to go down here. And then also just people's general worry and concern about the economy and where the economic situation in America was going. We can see that people had a pretty good feeling about how it was going to be in November. And then the perceived likelihood of U.S. recession over the next 12 months started to go back up and up as we saw more and more of these tariffs coming out. People became more and more worried that that was going to lead to a recession. My point here is that a lot of different polls across a lot of different people or companies or think tanks are all seeing the same thing, that consumers were initially quite excited when Trump got elected because it probably meant more money in their pockets given that he was conservative. But then as these tariffs and regulations and trade wars started, their confidence for that started to go down, and their belief that a recession would hit because of it started to go back up. The Fox News article continues. Trump received his best marks on border security as 55% majority approves, which kind of makes sense. That's the only issue where his ratings are in positive territory. On immigration, a record high of 47% of people approve and 48% disapprove, and my guess would be that that's almost straight down party lines, while a new low of 38% approve of the economy with 56% disapproving. And 38% approving is a really small number, and that goes past partisan polling. That's a huge chunk of Republicans also being upset. I believe some other polls I saw said something like 90% of Democrats were upset with how the economy is going under Trump, and with an overall rating of just 38%, especially when you see that a lot, like the majority approve of his border and immigration, and also 47% approve of how he's doing on immigration. A lot of those same people who said he was doing well on immigration, meaning they're more likely to be a Republican, said that he's not doing well on the economy, which is pretty bad. His worst ratings are on inflation, 33% approve, which is even lower than the general approval about the economy, with 59% disapproving, followed by tariffs, 33 approving with 58% disapproving, foreign policy, 40% approving with 54% disapproving, taxes with 38% approving and 53% disapproving, and guns with just 41% approving and 44% disapproving. Now, if you were to break this down by political demographic, most likely what you would see is that most of the people approving are Republicans, most of the people disapproving are Democrats. That's pretty easy to guess. But with numbers this low, like tariffs, only 1 in 3 people are actually approving of the tariffs. That goes way beyond all the Republicans liking it and all the Democrats disliking it. What that is all the Democrats disliking it, and then probably about half of Republicans are also disliking it. This is a wildly unpopular policy. And it makes sense that people are upset about things like the tariffs, worried about inflation and taxes, because tariffs are inflationary and they basically are a tax. And most everyone agrees that they are both inflationary and a tax, which is why you see so many Republicans flipping when it comes to this specific issue. I want to back up super quick here. A lot of Democrats see this and they take it as, Republicans are regretting having voted for Trump. That's actually not true. The most recent poll I saw was something like 94% of Republicans would vote for Trump again over Kamala or Biden. So this is not people turning on Trump. This is just people being upset at the decisions that Trump is making. As we scroll down the article, we see this, which is just a general overview of the poll and all of the answers, and we get to the third part. Overall, approval of Trump's job performance comes in at 44%, down 5 points from 49% approval in March, which is a pretty steep drop. That's lower than the approval of Joe Biden, 54%, Barack Obama, 62%, and George W. Bush, 63% at the 100-day mark of their presidencies. It's also lower by 1 point compared to Trump's 45% approval at this point 8 years ago during his first term. And I want to remind people watching that this is a Fox News poll on foxnews.com, the official website. I am not nitpicking biased left-leaning sources to try and make some anti-Trump point. This is by Fox News for Fox News viewers. And since this is being conducted by Fox News, it's more likely there's a disproportionate number of conservative or right-leaning or Republican people that respond to it, which makes it even more significant that a majority of people are unimpressed with so many things about Trump's presidency. And most specifically, they're upset about his economic policies. Some 59% of voters are unhappy with how things are going in the country. That's an improvement since the end of former President Biden's term, 68% dissatisfied, but, beating Biden in anything having to do with satisfaction numbers is not an accomplishment at all, but worse than 4 years ago at the beginning of Biden's term, with 53% being dissatisfied. It's also worse than the 100-day mark of Trump's first term, with a 53% dissatisfaction rate. Since his inauguration in January, satisfaction among Democrats has turned into dissatisfaction and vice versa among Republicans. Dissatisfaction has remained steady among independents. And this is actually pretty common to see, with the Democrats' satisfaction turning to dissatisfaction and vice versa, with the Republicans' dissatisfaction turning to satisfaction when you have a president of the opposite party winning. Consumers are very partisan when it comes to sentiment flips, and basically their sentiment flips in the same month that the other party's president comes into power. And we can see this here with this Fisher Investments tracks this. As you can see, December 16th, Trump wins the vote. Before that, Republicans are pretty optimistic about the economy and the consumer sentiment levels are pretty high. And then basically, as soon as it looks like he's going to be elected, consumer sentiment tanks for Democrats and continues to go down until Biden is elected. And then it shoots back up almost immediately, where it then comes down along with Republicans because of the high inflation rate, and then starts to go back up. And exactly the opposite thing is seen with the Republicans. You can see here, it's not very good, it's not very good. And then we see Trump getting elected in his first term, shoots back up as we know he's going to be the president, and then it tanks a bit with COVID because COVID kind of tanked everything. And then when Biden wins, immediately they become even less optimistic. And there's this huge swing here from COVID straight into a Democrat taking the presidency. And now that Trump has won, the consumer sentiment has spiked back up for Republicans. I don't know if it's crossed the threshold yet. Presumably they're going to cross each other, but it's still going to stay low overall and probably continue to come down together like we saw here. But the point is that whoever is in the presidential seat, the opposite party has poor consumer sentiment and outlook, despite the fact that the economy on average over the last 50 years or so has been improving kind of no matter who the president is. But back to the Fox News poll. Voters remain gloomy about the economy, as 71% rate economic conditions negatively, and 55% say that it is getting worse for their family. Both of those numbers are slight improvements compared to where they stood in December. Still, only 28% say it feels like things are getting better, and by a 22-point margin, more think that Trump's policies are hurting rather than helping the economy. Trump is underwater by a narrower 11-point margin. When voters asked what they expected from his policies in the long run, 40% of people think they're going to help versus 51% thinking that they're going to hurt the United States in the long term. Now, this part is interesting, but I do think it's a bit disingenuous. If we come down here to this part of the poll, we can see that it's talking about how people feel the economy is going, whether they think it's getting worse, getting better, or staying the same. And we can see that it's measured in April, then it's measured in May, and then it is measured in December, and then it's not measured again until April 2025. But in reality, in January, there was a huge spike in optimism as people thought things were going to be good and that it was going to improve. And then that optimism has come down basically every month since. And even though it's higher than it's been previously, if we were to look by month as opposed to looking at December and then April and skipping every month in between, we would see that the consumer sentiment has been trending downwards, even though it is higher than it has been recently. And before we move on and talk about more of these results and how people feel about the first 100 days, if you like this kind of deep dive into the news, then I'd love a subscription. I'm posting 1 or 2 times a week. Now, the reason that I'm specifically showing this poll from Fox News is because whenever I criticize a president for economic policy, which I've done both under Biden and now I have under Trump, one side will always say that I'm either a Republican or a Democrat, depending on who it is that I'm criticizing. And I think the best way to combat that is by choosing a Republican source to criticize a Republican president. But in reality, basically all of the polls are showing poor ratings for Trump, and the New York Post talks about this. President Trump battered by brutal polls showing his approval rating sinking, including one revealing the lowest ratings since World War II. And the reason I'm picking the New York Post is because it's also a conservative-leaning news site. President Trump is facing a dramatic drop in his approval according to 5 new polls released Sunday, including one that shows that he has the lowest ratings for a new president since World War II. Surveys from CBS, ABC and the Washington Post, NBC, CNN, and the New York Times all show Trump's standing in the public slipping significantly since he started announcing tariffs on all of America's biggest trading partners. Trump has tried to reassure the public that the tariff onslaught will lead to Americans paying lower income taxes and be a boon for manufacturing jobs. And look, I love lower taxes just as much as the next guy, but that's not going to be what's happening. And I think people are getting wise to that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Trumponomics isn't working, because we simply don't have enough data for that. After 3 months, we can't measure the success or failure of a president. But what I can say is that the steps currently being taken are setting it up to fail. However, there is good news that this is actually fairly easy to fix just by rolling back the tariffs and continuing to roll back regulation and stick to more traditional free market conservative values. The bad news is I don't see that happening. Thanks for watching.